Hey, what's up? This is Scott with Level Up Tutorials, and in this video, we're going to create our very first query. And this query is simply just going to return a string, but it's going to give us some experience writing 1, GraphQL schemas, 2, GraphQL queries, and 3, it's actually going to allow us to use some of the cool tools that exist within GraphQL. So let's get started with that right now. Okay, so at the end of the last video, we just ran this create Apollo server and there was nothing in it. And so therefore Apollo is like pretty worthless to us right now. But it is inside of our project. At the very least, it's inside of our project. And what that means is that if we head to our site, if we head to our local host, at this point, my app is at localhost port 3000. If we head to localhost port 3000 / graph IQL, pronounced graphical, right? You'll see we have this cool interface, which actually tells us that, well, GraphQL and Apollo are working to some extent. We also have a big old red error saying that there's no schema because we have no schema, right? So if you're wondering where your error was, that's where your error is at. In fact, since we're loading it up now on this page, we're getting a big old error. So these errors are going to be short-lived because obviously you want to create a schema. But you'll want to keep this page open because we're going to head back here and we're going to make this function very, very nicely. And you're going to see the benefits of using something like GraphQL. If you're wondering what the heck this page is and why it's important, this is actually going to be a nice little place where we can test out our queries. We can write our queries inside of here, and eventually we're going to be able to see the results right over here. There's some neat auto-completing stuff, and let me tell you, this resource is one of, I don't know, it's one of the coolest parts about GraphQL overall, which is kind of ridiculous, but it's definitely true. Okay, so let's actually head back to our app. I'm sorry, I'm just going to leave this GraphQL or graphical page open. Head to our code, and let's solve this issue where it's saying we had no schema. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is define some stuff. We're going to create a new variable, and we're just going to call this type defs. We're going to say const type defs, okay, for type definitions. And now eventually type defs is going to turn into an array of files and not just a backticks here. But what we want to have this equal to is a set of backticks or single quote for the string interpolation type, okay? And we're going to have these wrapped up with a semicolon. Inside of here, we're going to have some GraphQL schema code. And eventually this code is going to be living in .graphql files, which is going to be really cool. So we're going to get all sorts of, syntax highlighting and stuff like that. But right now we want to just say type is a query, okay? So what this is doing is it's querying the database, okay? So type query is going to be equal to some brackets. Now keep in mind this isn't JavaScript. So we don't have an equals, we don't have, what is type and query. This is GraphQL, okay? So don't freak out here when you see some of this code. Now we're just going to create a new query inside of this schema. Now, I say query inside of the schema because what a query is essentially a function, and you need to define all of your functions in your schema. And so this function name is just going to be say hi, okay? Now we have a colon, space, and then what this function returns. Like when you hit this function, what comes out? And what comes out is going to be a string. We're going to just do a simple hello world here, okay? So you can see we have a new query named hi, and hi is simply going to return a string. This is the bare bones as it gets. And eventually you'll have schemas for queries like we have here where it's a function that will hit your database. Then you'll have types that are their own thing. For instance, once we get going and making this resolutions app, we'll have a type named resolutions, and that resolutions type is going to include all of the different fields that are going to be in the database for that. We're also going to have types for mutations, which allow us to modify. In this case, we're going to be hitting the database. So, okay, this is just a basic function named hi. Now we have to define that function. But we do so in what's called a resolver. So let's make a resolver. We can say const resolvers, okay? Because typically you have more than one. And this is going to be equal to brackets. Now, where the GraphQL schema, this was not JavaScript, right? This will be JavaScript, okay? So it should feel nice and familiar. And we can say the type here of our resolver is a query, and inside of our query object, we're going to define a function, okay? If you're used to Meteor methods, you could imagine this sort of stuff as being like the Meteor methods wrapper, and then inside of here is all of your methods. So we can just say hi. Okay, hi is the name of this function, and we can define it just like a normal sort of function in an object with 2 parentheses and then brackets. From here, we can just return, and we can say hello, level up. Okay, wrap that off with a semicolon. So check it out. This is our very first GraphQL code. This is some GraphQL schema. This is our actual method or server-side code here. So this lets GraphQL know that this thing exists and what it expects from it, and this is the actual thing. Now we need to pass both of those into our Apollo server. Now how we do that is based on using this make executable schema. Okay, so let's come down here and say const schema is equal to make executable schema, and inside of here it's going to take an object. The object expects 2 different properties, one of which is typedefs. So instead of saying typedefs is equal to typedefs, we can just simply say typedefs. Okay, and then it also expects resolvers. So if you were confused about why we name things typedefs and resolvers rather than type definitions or resolver when there was one here, this is why. Because make executable schema is expecting typedefs and resolvers, so it's easier to name them like that. Now we have our schema. Let's go ahead and actually paste it into this create Apollo server, and let's save. So check it out. Again, we have our schema that's defining a query. We have our query itself. We're creating a schema for make executable schema. We're passing it into create Apollo server. Now, if all is well, we have our server restarting. And if we head to graphical, let's give this page a refresh. There's no auto refresh on this page. You can see our redness has gone away. What's cool is that we also get some information about our documentation over here. When I mentioned that this was one of the coolest features, I was not lying. This is super cool that we have our query and we can click it and see what fields it's expecting. Okay, so we have our query. Inside of our query, you can see we have a hi query, and our hi has a string returned. So inside of our code here, what you want, if this is blank, you'll want 2 brackets, and you'll want to just simply say, well, what would you guess? We want to say hi. Okay, and you can see we even get some auto completion. And the way you do this here is this is going to say, hey, I have a hi query. And you remember hi returns a string. So I can say hit this, and you can see what we get back is an object with a data property. Inside of that is hi and hello level up. Now this is great. This is our very first GraphQL query. This is our first data. And while it's not hitting the database, in the eventual future, in the near future, this resolver will be hitting the database like a Meteor method would. And this will be like a simple schema or just a schema that we have to define the data that's in the database. And you can imagine once we hit this, it's going to return just like our GraphQL did, but it's going to be returning with data from the database. It's going to be super duper cool, and it's going to be really insanely easy, and you're going to have a database server full stack app with GraphQL and Apollo set up in no time. But before we get into the database stuff, what we need to do is figure out how to get this data from this graphical interface, right, into our app right here. So instead of hello, we wanted to say hello level up. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is creating a data container for our data. We're going to be passing that in using GraphQL and GraphQL tags, and you're going to see how stupid easy it is to pull data from GraphQL on the client side. Okay, so in the next video, we're going to get set up with Apollo on the client side, and we're going to actually hit data from Apollo and get it into our component and get this to say hello level up. Okay, so as always, this is Scott with Level Up Tutorials. Thank you so much for watching. Again, if you want to help support, head on over to leveluptutorials.com/store and purchase some series or become a pro. It would mean a ton to me and allow me to keep creating videos such as this one. So thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.